Okay, so y'all can see my screen, right?
Yes.
Okay, great. So let me just have to make a to-do list thing here. And okay, so let's see, what is this called in the task? Just get the file name the same, task.js, task.js. So you're right that you want to use fs to read a file. So we're going to do two things. We're going to import fs using require. FS is just like the built-in file system library for Node. It's how you interact with the file system. And then, like it says in the documentation here, or hints at, I guess, that you're going to need to use that like fs.read file. So the way that works is, let me just make a function here. Come on now. Oh, no. Sorry, my computer froze there for a minute. So we're going to write a function, and we'll call this like read tasks. And we'll use fs in this function to read the tasks. So fs read file. And if we look at the documentation for fs in Node, just search for Node fs.read file. Wait for the internet. Read file, there it is. So we've kind of got an example here of how this works. You read file, you pass it a file name, and then the sort of encoding of the file, which just use UTF-8, which is kind of the default. And then you pass it a callback. So if in our case, that would look like, okay, we want to use a file called tasks.json. And it's going to be in the current directory. So I'm going to use this relative path for that, /. So like dot being the current directory / task.json. And then we'll just follow the lead in the documentation here. It's a UTF-8, which is just like kind of a standard text encoding. And then a callback function. And the callback is going to get called with two arguments, an error argument and a data argument. So error, data. And the data will be, if everything went well, the data will be the data from the file. Otherwise, if there was an error, that error argument will be not null, it will be zero. Check argument.
Trevor?
An error. Yeah.
Hey, sorry, you're breaking up a little bit.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
What was the last thing you heard well?
Well, I heard you, but it was just kind of breaking up. So I just wanted to make you aware. I don't know if. Gotcha.
Is it a little better now?
Yeah, it is.
Okay. Yeah, my connection has been doing that some today. So this is kind of how you would use read file. You pass in the file name, the encoding, and then a callback function that'll get called once the file has been read in, because reading the file takes some time. Since JavaScript is asynchronous, you have to sort of like tell it, hey, when you're done reading the file, here's what to do. And so what we're going to do is just log this data parameter, right? And so the next thing we have to do is we're about to try and read this file. And then what I'll do is I'll just call this read tasks method that we just created. So it gets called. And then if I open up another terminal here, oh, so many terminals. Kill that one. Okay, so we got our file up here. there's our code. And down here, if I go into, what did I call this? To do. Okay, so now I can just run this file with node tasks. And I get an error, right? I'm getting an error where we're throwing an error because read file had an error. No such file or directory, cannot open tasks.json. So we just need to create a task.json, which should be easy enough, right? So I'm gonna split my terminal here, or my editor, and open up tasks.json and put some JSON in here, which is just gonna be an array with a couple things in it, you know. And I need to use the right. Okay, so that's a valid JSON array. It's super simple. But now when I come down here and run this thing, it prints out the JSON file because what happened is it read in the file and then it called this callback. There wasn't an error, so we got past our if statement and it just logged out the data. So we can see what we're getting back here in data is the string that is, it's this JSON string, right? And we can kind of validate that by looking at type of, if we look at, I spell it right, type of data. Run this again. No, still can't. TYPE of, there it is. So we get string here. So this data that comes back from the file is just a string. So we just get a string that has all the content of that file. And then for your purposes, since there's JSON in this file, you're gonna wanna kind of parse it into a JavaScript data structure that you can manipulate and like add things to, remove things from. And for that, you're gonna use something called JSON parse, which is another thing that's built into JavaScript basically, and you don't have to require anything to use it. It's just always present. It's a global. And if we parse the data, what we'll get back is the task array. And if we log the type of that, we'll see that it's not a string. And we can just log out the contents itself. Right, so you see what we're getting back is an object, not a string. In this case, it's an array object. And it looks the same when you print it out, but that's actually because it's log, console.log is taking the array and then sort of representing it as a string again.
Hey Trevor, I have a question here.
Yeah.
You said this is JSON array object. How many types of this JSON array? How many types of JSON formats are there like this? Like I only knew of JSON objects, but this is JSON array. So are these the main two, or are there more?
Yeah, so JSON supports a number of different data types. There's objects, arrays, integers, strings. So you'll see like in this JSON file, there's actually two different data types going on here. There's an array, and it's the array is holding strings, which is another data type that JSON supports. And then it supports objects with this sort of object notation. So all of this is valid JSON. JSON it basically supports pretty much the same data types that JavaScript supports. So you object, array, string, integer. It does not have like a built-in date, if I remember correctly. So in JavaScript, there's like a date object. You can create dates by saying like new date. And JSON does not support that natively. But so your basic like object, array, string, number, those things are all supported. Good question. Helen, this was your question initially, right? Is this helping you kind of get past, like, is this what you were looking for in terms of how to start Does that help?
Um, I'm just not sure how like running, actually, maybe, yeah, maybe this can help. I'm just not sure how to pull all the information from like the other files into task.js.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so
You're actually only going to need one file.
okay.
I mean, you'll need the JSON file that's going to like store the saved tasks, right? So if someone's using your program and they're adding a bunch of to-dos to their list, that's going to get stored in tasks.json. That's kind of like your database.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as code goes, you could put all of your code in the task.js file. And what you're seeing here, maybe this will help. What you're seeing here in the example, where there's add and list and done. Those are different commands that are supported by this command line application, but you can implement the behavior for those all in task.js. And maybe that's the other piece here that you'll need to be comfortable with is this thing called process.argv that you were talking about. Process.argv. So that's going to have the list of all the things that were referenced in the command. And so what you can do with that is you can just grab the third argument, right? Because there's going to be the argv is going to hold, like in this example where it calls node task.js list. That's going to be index 0, 1, and 2 in the argv array. So if we get index 2, we'll get this list option or add or done. So we can kind of inspect that to see what the command that got executed was. And then you could do something different in each case using like a switch statement or other things. But you could say, for instance, case add break, and let's see, more of these. There's list and done, right? So done.
You're missing a closing quotation.
I'm missing it. Oh, I am. Thank you. And I copied that mistake 3 times. Okay, so this is the one that we actually have. We can say read tasks. Yeah. So you can grab the argument that's passed in using argv, and then just use a switch statement or something to like call a different function depending on what action was being requested, like this, right? So instead of these log statements, you could actually have some function that you're calling, like we do in the list case, that actually does the behavior that you need to for that command. Let me see if this works. Case add. Man, this is terrible syntax. Some of these guys.
I guess it's just like the idea of like creating a command line program kind of bugs me because I've never done it before. And like in the display pictures, the way they want us to like list out like the to-do list, like ID and description. Yeah, I don't know how to, I guess, make the program do its like functionality and like, oh, why are you looking up? Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, so yeah, there's a lot of different pieces to that. Have you spent much time in the modules leading up to this benchmark? The wrong direction. So, so a lot of this stuff, a lot of these like little pieces that come together into this to-do list are covered in some of like the previous modules, maybe in some of the phase 1 modules, I guess, also. There's some, so, what the best thing to tell you is here. This is right. Yeah, I mean, so is it just I guess I'm not following exactly like which part of it you're having trouble with. Is it just like you were talking about the, like the printing of this stuff out? Are you unsure of like how to store and persist the data and like pull it back out, or?
Yeah.
That
part.
Okay. So, so this is the basic concept here is that you're going to have a program that it's a command line program, right? And when someone types node task add by milk, you actually save that task. You write that data to this JSON file. And then the next time they run the command and list it, you're basically going and you're reading this file and then printing it out in a pretty way for them to see the things they added earlier. So you're sort of implementing like a really simple database by just like you're having a little program that automates writing and reading from a file and adds some formatting. So for instance, like we're reading this JavaScript array. So if we just look at the list part of it, which is the case we have, let me back out all this stuff. Just go back to this. So this is the code just for the list case, right? We have this task array. So we already know how to like read an array out of the file and print out just the raw array. To get this formatting, it's just console.log statements, right? We can get this ID and description and just kind of print that out. And then, change these here. This is kind of the format they want. And then you've got this tasks array, right? And you can just loop through it. And if I remember the order of these right, I and task. And you can log the actually, I think that will work. We'll each. So my JavaScript file, my JSON file got, sorry. I left an extra comma in here and that's not valid JSON. Nope, I got that backwards. For each gives you the item first and then the index in the array. Always takes me twice to get that right. There we go.
Oh, wow. I didn't think it would be that simple.
Yeah, it's, and yeah, that may be some of these, I know a lot of times, especially when you're starting out, these modules can be pretty intimidating, and sometimes, yeah, it's actually simpler than you think. But yeah, console.log, and you can just, and obviously we get some formatting things here. You need like an extra space. But the printing out, that's really all it's asking you to do, right? Just like read them out from the file and then print them out in a pretty way. And then the other pieces of it are probably a little more complicated. You have to figure out how to write back to the file new information. So you sort of you see here how you would pull out what is saved and turn it into a JavaScript array. And then if you're doing an add instead of a list, once you have this array, you'd want to like add something to it, and then use fs write file to write back data to the file and sort of overwrite the old list with the new list that has the new thing in it. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Do you feel like a little unstuck?
Yeah, I feel comfortable now getting started. Thank you.
Okay, cool. Awesome. And somebody asked in the chat why I decided to make it a JSON file. That's a good question. I think I decided that because I thought that we were supposed to, but maybe I'm making that up, and it was just, it does say task should be saved in a file called task.json. So yeah, it's recommended in the module, which is why I did that. But it's also just, it's really handy because eventually you're going to want to like be able to record whether a task has been checked off or not. And so the data that you're storing is going to be a little more complicated, right? I mean, you could just save the file in exactly the way that you wanted output, right? So you could do that. But then when you want to manipulate that data, that gets trickier. Like, how do you find the right task in here to mark it complete or remove it? And now you're sort of having to write code that like parses this text file and edits it appropriately. And it's just a lot easier if you have something like JSON that you can convert into a JavaScript array data structure, and then you know how to manipulate JavaScript data structures, it's just why JSON exists, I guess. Kind of a way to serialize data in a consistent way. All right, so command line to-do list we talked about. And there's another note in here about fs write file, which I guess we covered, we saw that. How does one read something like this from the bash man du command? Wow. That's a great question. That's funny. You look at things long enough and you forget how awful they seem. Right. So you're talking about this from when we do, just to catch people up. Du is one of the commands in the advanced terminal, I think. And man, if you pull up the manual for the du command, you get this synopses, which has this inscrutable list of, looks like somebody sneezed on their keyboard. And this is a really common, like in Unix systems, in these man files, this is kind of a common notation for giving you the short version of like what all the different command options are. If you played it all with regular expressions, some of this might make a little more sense because they're borrowing some notation from that. But basically what this means is there's this du command, and this is kind of telling you the different flags and options that you can pass to the command. This is a really complex example. Let me see if I can find an easier, like a simpler example. Okay, yeah, so here down on the bottom half I have echo, which is a much simpler command, and it's using the same format. But what it's showing you is the command name is echo, and then anything in square brackets is optional. So what this is saying is, you know, in this command, when you execute this command, you can optionally, as a first argument, specify -n. And then beyond that, you can optionally specify some string. And then the 3 dots are sort of a repeat, which means you can specify like as many strings as you want. So this is kind of a shorthand for saying that the valid way to invoke the echo command is echo followed by -n if you want to, followed by any number of other strings.
Is this a universal way of reading stuff? Because I noticed like the fs write file also has the character set, I guess, opening. That's why we're talking regular expression speak. The square brackets, and it has options inside it.
Yes.
Does the square brackets usually in when I'm reading things like this in JavaScript or Bash or anywhere else, does the square brackets usually mean it's optional?
Yeah, a lot of times it's very common if you're looking at like documentation for a function or a command like this. Optional arguments will be put in square brackets. Yeah.
Okay.
Kind of a common convention. Cool. It's a little confusing because in a regular expression, the square brackets mean something else. But in this context, the square brackets are usually used to like group something that's optional. So that's echo. If we go back up here to du, right, this is a lot more complicated version of the same thing. So it's saying the first thing you can pass to du is, you know, and you look at this first group of square brackets, it's optional. And the pipe delimiter, the vertical bar here, means the same thing it does in a regular expression, which is an or. So it's saying the first argument to du can be -H or -L or -P. So you can sort of use one of those things, but not all of them at once or two of them, right? And then the second argument can be one of these three options, -A, -S, or -D. And then there's an optional -C command, and you can just kind of read those out and it works the same way. And at the very end, there's the similar thing to echo, where the last of the arguments you would provide is a file or a list of files. And even that is optional. And then if you want to know, like, well, what does -H and -L and -P mean? If you scroll down in the man page, then they're all listed down here to tell you exactly what -H would do. So -H says, you know, follow symbolic links in the command. And these are probably alphabetical. So -L, symbolic links on the command line and in the file hierarchies are followed. It's the last one. P, probably something else about no symbolic links are followed. So you can kind of see that, like, those three different flags determine how du is going to handle symbolic links, which is just like shortcuts in a Unix file system. And so there's three ways it can do it. You can specify one of the three. And that's kind of what this is telling you in a very obscure sort of shorthand. Does that help?
Yeah, that's great. I was the one who posed the question, and that helps a lot because this shows up everywhere where you look at documentation. So it's good to know how to read it.
Yeah, yeah. This is this comes from a documentation, like a notation that I think is like EBNF notation, extended Bacchus-Nauer formation, which is a really like computer sciencey thing. And this is probably like a simplified version of that. But this type of notation ends up like you'll see this used to define like what valid syntax for an entire programming language is. You have these really complex trees and these kind of things. And so I think that's probably where this comes from or borrows from. Good question. Very good question. All right, what have we not covered? Does anybody who's here have a question on this agenda that we haven't covered yet?
I had the object-oriented to-do list.
Okay.
This is Samaya.
Hey, so create a simple to-do list function that is able to let you add, remove complete items in a list. Cool. So what's your question here? Or are you just kind of not sure how to start?
Well, I got a few things going, but yeah, basically I've been watching a lot of videos and reading about object-oriented, and I understand it in theory, but there's not a lot of exercises, and now there's exercises, yay, but there's no solution. So I was just kind of like going in circles. I'm sure like once I see it, I'll be like, duh, of course that's how you do it. But yeah, so if you can kind of go through it, that'd be great.
Yeah, so let's see, constructor below so that all the use cases for to-do list works. Okay. So I'm gonna, just so I don't flail around on. This is, the thing about JavaScript objects is that there's lots of different ways to do this. Yeah, okay, we'll do it this way. Because that looks like what they're, oh, I got the wrong window open, what they're hinting at. Okay, so let's start with, I think I'm gonna need to do a second file. Okay, so let's start with this code that they've given us, our to do, and uh-oh. There we go. Uh-oh. Well, we can keep all that commented out. Okay, so we have a to-do list, and we want it to create a class that returns a list object that has an add method, it looks like, that lets you pass in a string and adds to do to a list. Looks like the list is going to be represented as an array. And items that just returns the list, and a complete item that completes one of the items in the list. So what we're going to do here is, right, so this is going to be our constructor here, and we're going to represent so we're going to have this list. We'll represent it as an object. And down here, we're going to return that list. Uh-oh. Boom, boom, boom. Sorry. Okay, so I'm going to return the list, and in between, we're going to define all these functions. So we're going to create a list.add function that takes a string. We're probably not going to call it string. We're probably going to call it task.
Question.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I never know for functions or when to put them inside the constructor or to add them as a prototype later.
Yeah, there's actually, yeah, that is the other way you could do this. That's a really good question. And like newer versions of JavaScript, like ES6, offer like a much better syntax for doing this. That's probably a little more idiomatic, or like it's easier to understand. I would say adding it to the prototype later is probably, if you wanted to get really specific, is probably a little more efficient. Like it's just the code will run a little bit faster because the functions aren't being defined every time the constructor is called. So that is definitely another way you could do this. So we could just have this be like,
yeah, because that's what I was doing.
Yeah, mm-hmm. And that's totally, that is totally valid. Something like this, list. Is that what you're saying? You're doing something like that?
Well, yes, but I was doing it for all of the ones they provided. I didn't do it for list, but
list is not even, sorry, you're right.
Yeah, list is a new object.
It's not even the thing. Okay. So, right. Let's make lists an array. That probably makes more sense. Yeah, so this is another way you could do it. They both work. The thing about, that's the thing about JavaScript is like there's a couple different ways to sort of do object-oriented programming, and there's like really obscure pros and cons to each of them, and it seems to be more standardization, but you'll see different notations. Sometimes in the same code base, you'll see people creating objects different ways, which is a little unfortunate. So it sounds like this part you've got, and then so items, let's see, return. I think what we want to do is we want to create an, no. Sorry, it's been a while since I've done it this way. Reading name, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, you can just reference this right in the, all right, there we go.
And I usually don't see return statements inside a constructor because then when you instantiate it, it adds an implicit return statement.
Right, yeah. Yeah, it does. Yeah, so you don't need the return. And then in here, in your items list, if you would just return this dot list. So if we logged that out, I mean, that's the simple one, right? And then you can just add your other items, right? So you've got an add here, which is going to get passed in some task. And then it's just a matter of
for the add one, I was struggling with, like, of course, passing a task and then just this task is pretty easy, but like how to increment the ID every time you add one.
Yeah, that's interesting. So, right, so you've got this list and you have some new task and we're getting passed in a string and like you said, so if we're gonna have this task object that has the task name in it, but then it also has complete, false, right? And the question is, how do we set the ID, right? Which is a great question. Any ideas?
Can't you put the variable, or can't you list them in the constructor? So this dot ID equals ID, this dot task equals task. And in the constructor, you'll take an input of task in.
Well, so the constructor only gets called once. So the constructor gets called when we like instantiate this object, but then as we're adding in like more and more task items, the constructor doesn't get called again. Are you saying like create a counter, like initialize a counter in the constructor and then like kind of keep track of where we are?
The way I did it was in the constructor, I made a this.id, and in my add function, I would increment the ID.
Okay, yeah, so you're saying you did something like this, and you initialize it to 1, maybe? And then down here,
or 0.
This dot ID, okay, 0. And then you would just increment it?
Yeah,
like that.
For me.
Yeah, that would, that seems reasonable. Let's try it out. List dot items. Let's log this out. We'll log out some items, and then we will add new item 1. Let's make a couple of these, and then log this thing out again. Let's run to-do 2. Awesome. Yeah, so that works. The other thing I was going to suggest is you kind of already do have something that's keeping track of a number here, in that you have a list and you can just check and see how long it is. So the other thing you could do is just set the ID to this dot list dot length. And I believe that would give you a similar result. This model might break down though if you're ever actually removing things from the list instead of just marking them complete, if you were actually like pulling something off the list entirely. then like the length of the list would go up and down and your IDs would get all messed up. So keeping track of the ID as like an object attribute probably does make sense. Does that help?
It does. I guess my main issue was that I didn't know how to to format my task in objects and in an array, but I just needed to declare empty array and then put everything in an object.
Yep. Awesome. Okay, well, unfortunately, I've got a hard stop at 3. I've got an interviewing for new SCP positions to get more people on the floor. Yay. But that means I have to jump off and go talk to somebody about a job. So thanks for all of your questions. I'm sorry if we didn't get to everything. I will check my calendar. Got a bunch of meetings this afternoon, but I'll try and peek back in to Slack kind of in between them and follow up if you have any more questions. And if we don't get it today, I've got a little bit more of an open schedule tomorrow. I can help out. But thanks for coming, everybody.
Thanks a lot, Trevor.
Uh-huh.
Have a good day.
Yeah, you too.
All right, bye.